Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the Environment Medicine podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Bindu Akanti. Dr. Bindu Akanti is a professor at UT Health Houston. She's a professor of medicine and is a pulmonologist as well. We are so thrilled to have you here today. So I heard recently that you were on the local news talking about the Saharan dust and how that affects our lungs. Could you share a little bit more about that?
First of all, thank you for doing this. I think it's so important to understand the environmental effects on what happens to the human body, especially the global burden of disease. So the way it started is that, when you have these dust storms and they kind of move in, it happens all the time, whether we know it or not. Outside, the air must have traveled from somewhere and it's come here. But the main thing about the Saharan dust storm is that it originated somewhere in North Africa, right? And so it's fine dust particles. So they're so fine, tiny that you won't be able to actually see them. But if you have like pre-existing lung disease, and many people don't realize that they have lung disease, but then they'll say, hey, I have asthma. Well, asthma is lung disease. It may not be like full-blown asthma, but like there are patients that will have reactive airway disease. And for instance, you may go out and be like, I'm having a little shortness of breath. Maybe it's the allergies. Like those are lung diseases, right? So these tiny particles go through your airways and they go into your lungs and they incite a response, right? And then people either get short of breath or they suddenly have allergies, or if you have pre-existing lung disease like asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is basically people that have had either tobacco exposure, like they may not have smoked, but they may have had exposure, or people that smoke, people that vape. A lot of students these days are vaping. They think that that is the safer version of tobacco. And I think the jury is still out, because vaping is really heating up an oil at a very into even tinier particles. Mm-hmm. So it goes directly into the end alveoli. Mm-hmm. So in my book, obviously you don't want to vape or smoke, but I think it's a false sense of security that vaping is fine. Mm-hmm. I think vaping does eventually cause harm to lungs. We've certainly seen patients that have died from vaping, like straight up, and we've written about it too. So it's a big deal. So now those kind of patients, or people that go out and experience this dust storm, they may have shortness of breath. And I think that's what the TV station was interested in is it a true concern? Yeah, especially in places like Houston, where we already have a lot of chemical plants, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, where we are right now, just like within a mile and a half is a natural, like a coal plant. Mm-hmm. So we don't think about it, but I think it's real. This is a real problem.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned how Houston, we have a lot of the petrochemical industry over here. Houston actually ranks 6th in U.S. cities whenever it comes to air pollution, because it's known as the energy capital of the world. And so how do you think this impacts our health, our residents' health?
So I think there are some people that are prone to lung diseases, like, if you have allergies and asthma, genetic history. Mm-hmm. In a large number of cases, I think just because we don't have symptoms, right, we underestimate it. If, for instance, I'm about to go to clinic, it may be a very bad dust storm and I have allergies, then I just use Flonase and I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's like survivor mode, right? Like, let's get our work done. But I think what we don't realize is if we don't make an impact now, what if young children, right, this is affecting them and things are going to progressively get worse, and you don't know how their overall health is impacted. For instance, we know that this pollution, right, like it's just pollution, it's not just lung health, it directly impacts cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
Right? So, and cardiovascular health is the leading cause of death in America and worldwide. So I think in Houston, we do need to do a better job. Number one, understanding what are the determinants of pollution, and then number two, what is it that we can truly do about it?
Yeah. So how exactly would it would a doctor like you, how would you kind of diagnose that air pollution is an issue? Because there's so many different factors, like so many different things we expose ourselves to in our daily life. So how would you kind of deduce?
So number one, it has to do with like if patients come in with symptoms, right? Number two, taking a detailed history. How often are they outdoors? Where do they live? Do they have increased symptoms if they do certain activities on those days? And then the next thing is, so that's called history taking. Then you do an objective exam, right? Like from their oxygen levels, like which is a pulse oximeter, to being able to listen for wheezing. Wheezing is like shortness of breath is one thing, but difficulty of the air actually getting into the lungs. And then with that information, we say, let's now do objective testing. And people don't realize it, but objective testing is these questionnaires too. Like how often do you need to wake up and use an inhaler at nighttime? How often when you go out are you unable to, like for instance, push yourself, go for running and things like that. Then we do pulmonary function testing, where you go into this box and then you just take a deep breath in and then you blow as hard as you can out. And it basically quantifies your lung function, right? Then if patients continue to get symptomatic, chest x-rays and CAT scans are also used. But it's then we put the whole thing together and go, well, at this point you have this level of disease, or these are the things you could do to make sure that you don't get worse, or you truly have, and this is how we will take care of you.
Okay, that's very interesting actually. And whenever it comes to like our environment and stuff, how would you say socioeconomic factors impact people that are lower income, maybe people of color as well? How do you think air pollution affects them a little bit more disproportionately?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question, right? Because you would think that we would definitely need to invest more resources, right, in those age groups, because already the odds are against them in terms of ability to have a good, good health during their childhood and leading into their adulthood. So I think access to nutrition, shelter, and an environment that is free of pollution should be a right for children. And unfortunately, that may or may not exist, right? So if you have communities that are next to industry, right? For instance, in India, they have slums like right next to the industrial factories and stuff. And I think in the United States, if you think of these neighborhoods, if they're really close to downtown and they have lack of access to like nature and things of that. I mean, I wish we had more urban gardens, right? And I think it starts with education. And I think if we can empower schools so that they can teach children about pollution and all the determinants, there are many, many things you need to do, like access to, again, food, nutrition, exercise, and all of that. For instance, we know that childhood obesity is directly linked to really poor outcomes, right? And we know childhood obesity is disproportionate in lower income populations, and actually it's everywhere, unfortunately. But they are definitely affected. There's just like there are dry spots in the city where there's not access to good food. I believe probably that if you really looked at the air quality, there are probably pockets in many cities where the quality is worse compared to other areas.
I see. Yeah. And what do you think are some, public health interventions that can be done by policymakers?
Oh, I think that's a question that you'll have to research. There's so much data out there. Unfortunately, there's not one thing that has come out to be the intervention that would reduce air, that would improve air quality. But in terms of just strictly health, if we just focused on that, because because pollution is really broad, right?
Oh, yeah,
That could
for sure.
deal with automobiles, air traffic, and all of those things. For instance, yesterday I was watching CNN, and it talked about for Houston area weather and stuff. Oh, air quality is bad. You shouldn't do this. You should commute, and you should reduce drive-through lanes. I was like, drive-through lanes? I was like, oh, because cars are stopped and they emit toxic chemicals. I think it starts with education. I think that's the number one public health message that we should have going on, is that people need to be aware there's a problem. And then I think we have, like, every family deals with problems differently. And I think for each unique family may have a different set of air quality concerns, right? It may be that they are living in a house that has old lead, for instance. So, right, air purifiers are not going to do anything. They actually literally have to move out. There may be some apartments that have like aspergillus or fungus and mold, right? And that takes a whole different intervention. There may be areas where the ozone is an issue. So, I mean, that they are strict avoidance, right? You just don't go out. So I think it's not one solution to this big problem. We need to devote resources to, like, at many, many levels. And that's not totally my area of expertise in terms of like where money should be devoted, but coming from strictly as a pulmonologist, I think education and self-awareness of your own body, and if you are a parent or a caregiver of either children or elderly of vulnerable populations, then I think knowing, hey, this is not normal. She's about to go out. We should take the inhaler with her. We should make sure she's not dehydrated, because when you don't drink enough water and stay hydrated, the mucus can really thicken and you can have more shortness of breath. So I think it comes down to education in my book.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And, that is what we're doing here in environment medicine.
Yeah.
But whenever it comes to policy making, do you think that there should be more of like STEM influence, maybe more people, more scientists being involved in this process?
Yeah. And I think that there are enough scientists that are taking care of it. What we really need is your generation. I think we need to, this is like, it's not something that you suddenly become aware of. You need to really be exposed to it at every age, and you kind of fight for it, and then you ramp it up. I had the privilege of going to Ecuador about this time last year, and the driver, the tour guide, right? Like, we were just talking about it, and he was talking about how the rainforest is being depleted, and there's a lot of industrialization happening. So, and then we know that the Amazon, as it is going down, or ozone and everything else is kind of linked to it, right? And then he made this comment that blew my mind, and he said, you do know we are the lung of the earth. And I was just like, yeah, like literally. We take in O2, we give away CO2, the Amazon takes in CO2 and releases oxygen, and the Amazon is being like literally cut down, right? And so we have active destruction, right, of the lung of earth. And then I was just kind of like, and he had so much more insight than I did. And then I got to go to the Galapagos, and like, you just see the natural diversity, and like, you just are like, wow. And they're saying that the Galapagos, the way we know it right now, may not exist in like 10, 15 years. Because of the pollution and because of many other issues that are happening in Earth, and the currents and all of that stuff. So it takes people different experiences to wake up about global warming and pollution. A large majority of people still don't believe in it, especially because our science has not been concrete about it. Things have been like, they publish, they redact, then they publish some more. And I think the intention is there, but we need to like act as one group of people, like, the earthlings, I guess, but like, and try to see if we can fix the problem. But if we have like a huge number of us that like actually literally don't believe in it, that it doesn't exist, that's where I think education comes into play. especially with your generation. I think you guys are more believing, and I don't know if I've never looked at a study whether it has been done, but I think you guys, the younger generations, are actually more for it than us and the older generations.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not too sure about that. I also haven't really looked into too many studies about like Gen Z and their thoughts on climate change, but I do know that my generation is also known for their like overconsumption, and you know, that's where like, again, education would be great, so then people are a little bit more cognizant of the effects their actions have on the other people in this world, and you know.
And like for talking about over consuming, the New England Journal just came up with a paper, I think not last month but the month before, about microplastics. And that was fascinating. So what they did is they looked at people that had carotid endarterectomies, and I think this was a Harvard study. And then they had asked these patients, right, what was their consumption of like things like water, and like how much plastic exposure they had on a daily basis. And then they did the surgeries, right? I think it was less about the history taking, but they did the surgeries, and then they found evidence of these microplastic, nanoplastics in the actual specimen of the plaque that they removed from the carotid arteries, right? They saw that, like it was visible. Then they separated into two groups. The ones that had the plaque with the microplastics, and then the one that didn't have, right, the microplastics. And then they followed the course of patients, right, that had the microplastics in their atherosclerotic plaque to see what happened to them, versus this group that did not have the microplastics in the atherosclerotic plaque. And those patients that had the plaque had worse outcomes than those that did not.
Wow.
So what the study for the first time has shown is that if you have evidence of it in your body, then your overall outcome is poorer. And what they suspect is that most of these kind of microplastics are usually in the small 1 liter bottles.
I see. Wow.
So I'm guilty of it. So now we're using the stainless steel, and gone towards that, but just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, wow. And also like microplastics are in the air as well.
Yeah, like, everywhere, especially when we are surrounded by industry.
Yeah. And even indoors, the furniture and stuff, I think just abrasion can release them into the air. And
I was and the cutting boards that we use, you know, the plastic cutting boards. So that's another aspect of it too. So a lot to talk about in terms of environmental medicine, more than just the heat wave. Like, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Have you gone into the literature in microplastics in depth when it comes to?
Not yet.
Okay.
We should.
Yes, we should definitely.
We should.
I do hear that literature is a little bit limited in terms of microplastics' effect on our body.
Yeah, see, it's all about like devotion and commitment to research, right? There's so much one could study, especially in the post-COVID world, where our lungs were injured a little bit, almost like half of the world, right? At some level by the virus. I think there is a little bit more attention that is being played about lung health in general. So again, I think these are going to come in the future, but I think the best thing for us right now is to know that, you know, in a world where we're constantly exposed to Saharan dust storm, allergies, natural, like the coal plants and everything, that the least we could do is, number one, try to minimize our footprint. And then second thing is not to smoke or vape or be exposed to that. And the third thing is, when you know that the air quality is bad from the weather reports, try to minimize such exposure and stay indoors.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of what you were saying. And thank you so much for all your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it was wonderful. I really loved our discussion. And yes, thank you so much for watching, everybody. We will link information in the description below. So thank you so much for watching, and please do check out more of our content.